Pay very close attention because this truth may change the way you see certain people, and perhaps teach you now what most people only learn far too late. Not everyone who stays close to you wants to see you grow. Some people remain by your side because they benefit from your weakness. Others like the version of you that needs them, and some can only support your dreams as long as they believe those dreams will never become reality. The most dangerous part is that these people rarely reveal themselves right away. They smile at you, they listen to your plans, they call you a friend, they say they are rooting for you. But over time, something begins to change. Small comments, small criticisms, absences, small actions that individually seem insignificant, but together they tell a completely different story. Maybe you've already experienced this. Maybe you shared an important dream with someone and received words of encouragement, but when that dream started becoming reality, that person's enthusiasm disappeared. Maybe you spent years helping someone, always present, always available, always willing to listen. But when it was your turn to need support, you found only silence. Or perhaps there is someone in your life who constantly steals your peace while continuing to claim they care about you. And here is something the Stoics understood nearly 2,000 years ago. Not all closeness is friendship. Not all kindness is loyalty. Not all companionship deserves access to your heart. Marcus Aurelius often reflected on the influence people have on our minds. He knew that the quality of our lives is deeply connected to the quality of the influences we allow into our inner world. And the Bible teaches exactly the same kind of wisdom. In Proverbs 4:23 we read, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." Notice the depth of this passage. The Bible is not telling you to live suspicious of everyone. It is teaching discernment. It is teaching protection. It is teaching that not everyone should have the same access to your heart. And perhaps that is exactly where many of us go wrong. We want to believe the best about people. We want to trust. We want to belong. We want to be accepted. And without realizing it, we end up ignoring signs that later become wounds. But this video is not about becoming cold. It is not about isolating yourself. It is not about believing that everyone is against you. It is about learning to see people more clearly. It is about developing the wisdom to observe before trusting. It is about protecting your peace without losing your kindness. Today, we are going to explore 7 Stoic lessons that reveal how to identify people who drain your energy, protect your mind, and build healthier relationships through the union of Stoicism and Christian faith. But first, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever noticed that some people seem to like the version of you that needs them more than the version of you that is growing? Think about that for a moment. Because that question may reveal more about your relationships than years of acquaintance ever could. Epictetus taught that much of human suffering is born when we try to control what was never under our control. And few things are less under our control than another person's character. You do not control someone's loyalty. You do not control someone's honesty. You do not control someone's gratitude. You do not control how someone reacts to your growth. Yet we often spend years trying to please, trying to convince, trying to prove our worth, trying to earn approval that may never come. And that is exactly where suffering begins. But there is something fascinating about this reflection. Centuries after Epictetus, Jesus would teach a very similar truth. In the Sermon on the Mount, he declared, "Do not worry about tomorrow." Matthew 6:34. At first glance, it seems like a teaching about anxiety, but there is something deeper. Jesus was talking about trust, about letting go of the illusion of control, about stopping the burden of carrying weights that belong to God. And this is where Stoicism and Christian faith meet in an extraordinary way. Epictetus explained the mind. Christ revealed the purpose. One showed why we suffer. The other showed where we find rest. Both pointed to the same truth. Peace begins when we stop trying to control what does not belong to us. And that includes people. It includes their opinions. It includes their expectations. It includes the way they choose to act. But there was a man named Daniel who had not yet learned this lesson. He believed he was surrounded by loyal friends, people who knew his dreams, people who listened to his plans, people who seemed happy about his growth. Whenever he had a new idea, he immediately shared it. Whenever he started a project, he told everyone. Whenever he faced a difficulty, he turned to those he considered closest. To him, that was friendship. But there was something he had not yet realized, something Seneca had warned about centuries earlier. We confuse access with loyalty. We confuse familiarity with character. We confuse closeness with trust. And that confusion usually comes at a high cost, because not everyone who enters your life deserves access to your inner world. Daniel did not know that yet, but the events of the following months would reveal a truth that would completely change the way he saw friendship, trust, and loyalty. And it was at that moment that everything began to change. Daniel believed he knew the people around him well. After all, some of those relationships had existed for years. They celebrated birthdays together. They talked often. They shared problems. They exchanged countless favors. Everything seemed solid. Everything seemed genuine. But life has a curious way of revealing what words can hide. And that usually happens when you begin to change, not when you are standing still, not when you are comfortable, but when you begin to grow. That is exactly what happened to Daniel. After years of living almost on autopilot, he decided to change a few things. He started waking up earlier. He reduced distractions. He began studying every day. He returned to prayer more consistently. He started taking care of his health, and he set goals that once seemed far away. At first, everyone appeared supportive. Everyone seemed happy. Everyone seemed to believe in him. But there was something he still had not noticed. Some people enjoy your company. Others enjoy your stagnation. And there is an enormous difference between the two. The first signs were almost invisible. Small comments, disguised jokes, seemingly innocent observations. Nothing serious, nothing that justified immediate concern. But the Stoics taught something extremely important. The truth rarely reveals itself in major events. It appears in patterns. Seneca observed that a wise person does not make decisions based on isolated events, but on repeated behaviors. And Daniel began to notice a pattern. Whenever he talked about growth, certain people became uncomfortable. Whenever he shared an achievement, someone minimized it. Whenever he made progress, comparisons appeared. At first, he ignored it. Then he justified it. Later, he began to question it. And then something happened that completely changed his perception. But before we continue, there is a truth worth reflecting on. The Bible is full of stories about people who faced resistance precisely when they began to grow. Joseph was sold by his own brothers when his dreams pointed toward something greater. David was persecuted after his rise. Nehemiah faced mockery when he began rebuilding the walls. Not because they were doing something wrong, but because growth often exposes what is hidden in the human heart. And that is still happening today, because one person's transformation often functions as a mirror for others, and not everyone likes what they see reflected. Daniel still did not understand this. He believed the problem was him. Maybe he was exaggerating. Maybe he was being too sensitive. Maybe he was interpreting everything incorrectly. But then came the difficult season. The project he had started faced obstacles. Some investments did not work out. Financial problems began to emerge. The emotional pressure increased. For the first time in a long while, he needed support. And that was when something surprising happened. The people who had always been around began to disappear. Messages took longer, invitations became fewer, interest faded, availability vanished. Some people did not even ask how he was doing, and it was at that moment that a phrase from Epictetus finally made sense to him. The philosopher taught that we should not become attached to appearances, but to the true nature of things. Daniel finally began to see the true nature of some relationships, and the truth was painful. Not everyone valued his presence. Many valued only what they received from him. But the real lesson was still ahead, because there is a difference between discovering who others are and discovering who you yourself have become. During those difficult weeks, Daniel began spending more time alone, not by choice, but because life had created that space. And what initially seemed like loneliness began to turn into reflection. One morning, while reading scripture, he came across a passage he had known since childhood. Proverbs 17:17 says, "A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity." He read it again, then once more, and something inside him changed, because he finally understood that adversity serves a purpose few people recognize. It reveals character, it reveals intentions, it reveals priorities. It reveals who is by your side because of who you are, and who is by your side because of what you offer. And it was at that moment that everything started making sense. Marcus Aurelius often wrote about the importance of accepting reality as it is, not as we wish it would be. That may have been Daniel's greatest battle. He was not suffering only because certain people were absent. He was suffering because he was losing an illusion, the image he had built of them, the version of them that existed only in his mind. And that is a pain many people carry without realizing it. We do not suffer only because someone disappointed us. We suffer because we became attached to the expectation that person would be different. But when Daniel finally accepted reality, something unexpected happened. The anger began to fade. The resentment began to diminish. The need for explanations began to weaken because he understood something profound. People were simply revealing who they were. Nothing more, nothing less. And when you see that, you stop wasting energy trying to change people who do not want to change. But there was an even more important discovery waiting for him, because the biggest problem had never been those people. The biggest problem was the reason he needed their approval so badly. And that was exactly where Stoicism and Christian faith began to meet in a transformative way. Because the answer to his pain was not only in understanding others, it was in understanding himself, and that revelation would change everything. There is a question that changed Daniel's life, and perhaps it can change yours as well. The question was simple. Why do I suffer so much when certain people disappoint me? At first, he believed the answer was obvious. Because people were wrong, because they were unfair, because they failed to meet expectations. But the more he reflected, the more he realized something deeper was happening. The pain did not come only from their actions. It came from the emotional dependence he had created on their opinions. And this is where Stoicism begins to touch one of the deepest wounds of the human soul. Epictetus taught, if someone hands over his peace to the opinions of others, he becomes their slave. Think about that for a moment. How many decisions have you made just to avoid criticism? How many times have you stayed in a relationship simply to avoid disappointing someone? How many times have you hidden who you truly are in order to remain accepted? Most people believe prison is a physical place. But some of the most painful prisons exist within the mind. The need for approval, the fear of rejection, the dependence on recognition, the constant search for validation. And Daniel began to realize that much of his suffering came from exactly that. It was not only about friendships, it was about identity. But there is something fascinating. Centuries after Epictetus, Jesus would teach a truth pointing in the same direction. In John 5:44, he asks a powerful question. How can you believe since you accept glory from one another but do not seek the glory that comes from the only God? Do you see the depth of that? Jesus was revealing a spiritual problem that continues to destroy the peace of millions of people. When your identity depends on people, your emotional stability depends on them as well. And that is extremely dangerous. Because people change, people fail, people disappoint, people leave, but God does not. And here we find one of the most beautiful connections between Stoicism and Christian faith. Stoicism teaches that you should not surrender your inner government to external circumstances. Christian faith teaches where that government should be anchored, in God. That is why Marcus Aurelius constantly wrote about the importance of returning within. But Christianity goes one step further. It invites us to return to God. One teaches stability, the other teaches trust. One teaches self-mastery, the other teaches surrender, and together they form an extraordinary combination. But Daniel still needed to learn something important, something many people never learn. Not everyone who leaves your life is a loss. Some departures are revelations. And it was at that moment that he began to see his experiences differently. Before he asked, "Why did this person disappoint me?" Now he asked, "What is this situation trying to teach me?" That change seems small, but it completely transforms the way you face life, because it stops focusing only on the behavior of others and begins focusing on your growth. Joseph went through this, betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, forgotten in prison. But at no point was his story defined by betrayal. It was defined by God's purpose. Imagine if Joseph had spent his entire life trying to understand every action of his brothers. He never would have become who God called him to be. And perhaps this is a message someone needs to hear today. You do not need to fully understand the people who hurt you in order to keep moving forward. You do not need to decode every behavior. You do not need to uncover every motive. You do not need every answer. Sometimes peace begins when you stop investigating people and start strengthening your own soul. And that brings us to the fourth lesson. Marcus Aurelius wrote something extraordinary. The best revenge is not to become what hurt you. What a powerful statement, because when someone lies to you, there is a temptation to become suspicious of everyone. When someone betrays you, there is a temptation to completely close your heart. When someone disappoints you, there is a temptation to become bitter. But that means allowing the wound to continue governing your life, and neither Stoicism nor Christianity supports that path. Christ never taught bitterness. He taught discernment. He never taught naivety. He taught wisdom. He never taught emotional dependence. He taught trust in God. And that difference changes everything, because you can continue being a kind person. You can continue being generous. You can continue believing in people. But now you do so with discernment, with boundaries, with wisdom, with maturity. And there is a psychological reason this works. Research on emotional resilience shows that the most resilient people are not those who never experience disappointment. They are those who can find meaning in difficulties. And that is exactly what we see in both Stoicism and Scripture. Romans 8:28 declares, "And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God." Notice that the text does not say all things are good. Betrayal is not good. Abandonment is not good. Disappointment is not good. But God can use even these experiences to produce growth, discernment, and maturity. And when Daniel finally understood that, something inside him began to change. He stopped desperately seeking approval. He stopped chasing people who clearly did not want to stay. He stopped over-explaining his decisions. He stopped measuring his worth by the attention he received. And for the first time in a long time, he experienced something he had been searching for during years: peace. Not because people changed, but because he changed. And now comes the most important question of all. How do you apply this transformation in real life? How do you protect your peace without hardening your heart? How do you love without being manipulated? How do you trust without being naive? That is exactly what we are about to discover. After everything we have seen so far, an inevitable question arises. What do you do with this knowledge? Because recognizing patterns is important. Understanding people is important. Learning about Stoicism is important. Knowing the Bible is important. But nothing changes while that knowledge remains only in the mind. Transformation begins when it descends into real life, and perhaps this is exactly where so many people get stuck. They understand the lesson, they agree with the lesson, but they continue repeating the same patterns. They continue handing their peace over to people who do not know how to care for it. They continue seeking approval from people who will never be satisfied. They continue opening their hearts to people who have already shown they do not possess the maturity to protect it. But today, that can begin to change. And I want to share 3 simple practices that unite Stoic wisdom and Christian faith. Practices you can begin today. First practice, observe before trusting. What to do? Stop rushing relationships. Stop giving full access to your life simply because someone seems nice. Observe, listen, analyze patterns. Watch how the person treats others. Watch how they react to your boundaries. Watch how they react to your growth. Why it works. Seneca taught that we should be slow to trust and complete in our trust. The Bible teaches something similar. Jesus said, "You will know them by their fruits," Matthew 7:16. Notice how these 2 forms of wisdom meet. Neither tells you to judge words. Both tell you to observe fruits, actions, patterns, character. How to apply it in real life. Before sharing an important dream, a weakness, or a significant decision, ask yourself, has this person demonstrated over time that they deserve this level of trust? If the answer is uncertain, wait. Time usually reveals what emotion tries to hide. Second practice, learn to protect your peace. What to do? Start saying no when necessary, without guilt, without aggression, without lengthy explanations, simply with clarity. Udain, why it works. Epictetus taught that whoever tries to please everyone inevitably loses themselves, and Jesus also established boundaries. Many times crowds sought him, yet he withdrew to pray. Many times people demanded immediate answers, yet he did not chase their approval. This is something few people notice. Christ was loving, but he also had healthy boundaries. How to apply it in real life. During this week, identify one situation in which you usually say yes, only because you fear displeasing someone, and try responding differently. Maybe it is a favor. Maybe it is an obligation. Maybe it is a relationship that is draining your strength. Protect your peace without losing your kindness, because there is a huge difference between serving and constantly sacrificing yourself for people who do not value that sacrifice. Third practice, strengthen your identity in God. What to do? Dedicate a few minutes every day to prayer, silence, and reflection, not only when you are suffering, but especially when everything seems to be going well. Why it works. A large part of emotional manipulation works because there is a deep need for validation. When someone praises you, you feel strong. When someone criticizes you, you feel destroyed. When someone approves of you, you feel secure. When someone rejects you, you feel lost. But an identity built in God is far more stable. Isaiah 26:3 declares, "You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast, because they trust in you." And here, once again, we find the union between Stoicism and faith. Marcus Aurelius sought inner stability. Christian faith reveals the ultimate source of that stability, God. The Stoic seeks mastery over himself. The Christian finds strength for that through trust in God. And when these 2 perspectives walk together, something extraordinary happens. You stop being governed by the reactions of people. Now I want to share a profound reflection. Perhaps some people have recently left your life. Perhaps someone disappointed you. Perhaps a friendship has changed. Perhaps an important relationship has ended. And perhaps you are still trying to understand why. But what if the right question is not, "Why did this happen to me?" but rather, "Who am I becoming through this?" Because that was the question of the Stoics. And it is also a deeply Christian question. Joseph asked that question. David asked that question. Paul asked that question. They did not allow pain to define their identities. They allowed it to refine their character. And perhaps God is doing the same with you right now. Maybe this season is not about losing people, Maybe it is about gaining clarity. Maybe it is not about rejection. Maybe it is about direction. Maybe it is not about abandonment. Maybe it is about preparation, because some doors close to protect your peace. Some relationships end to preserve your purpose, and some disappointments arrive to reveal what you could not have seen any other way. So, I want to leave you with a challenge for the next 7 days. Observe. Do not chase. Do not force. Do not beg for attention. Do not try to convince anyone to stay. Just observe. Observe who seeks you without an agenda. Observe who respects your boundaries. Observe who celebrates your victories. Observe who remains present when you have nothing to offer. And most importantly, observe who stays by your side when your only usefulness is simply being yourself. Because that is where character appears. That is where loyalty reveals itself. And that is where the truth becomes visible. Remember, you do not need to hate anyone. You do not need to live distrusting everyone. You do not need to build walls around your heart, but you do need to build gates. Marcus Aurelius understood this. Seneca understood this. Epictetus understood this. And Scripture teaches the same principle. Guard your heart. Protect your peace. Trust with wisdom. Love with maturity. Forgive with discernment. And walk with God. Because Stoicism explains the mind, but Christian faith reveals the purpose. And when the two walk together, you learn something that changes everything. You can be kind without being naive. You can love without being dependent. And you can move forward without losing who God created you to be. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these 7 lessons spoke most deeply to your heart today? Write it in the comments. And if you want to continue exploring the wisdom of the Stoics and the teachings of the Christian faith in order to live with greater peace, purpose, and inner strength, subscribe to the channel and follow the upcoming videos. See you soon.